I still remember the night everything started falling apart like it happened yesterday. I had just walked through the door, kicking off my shoes, expecting a quiet night with my wife, Melanie. Instead, the whole vibe in the house fell off. You know how you can just sense when something is wrong? She was standing by the kitchen counter, gripping a bottle of wine, so tight I thought she might shatter it. Her hands were shaking slightly as she poured herself a glass. I knew right then that whatever she had to say wasn't going to be good. Over dinner, she cleared her throat, looking down at her plate, like the mashed potatoes suddenly became the most interesting thing in the world. And then she dropped the bomb. Vincent, I think we need to take a break. Try open relationships. Just for 2 weeks. I swear my brain short-circuited. I put my fork down slowly, trying to process what she had just said. What? You want me to let you date someone else? It's not like that, she said quickly, almost panicking. It's just an experience. We need a little freedom to figure out what's important. It felt like the ground shifted beneath me. My stomach churned. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream or just walk out the front door and never come back. I kept waiting for her to tell me she was joking, some sick, twisted joke, but her face was dead serious. That was when it hit me. She'd already made up her mind. I had no say in it. And just like that, every part of me started screaming the same question. Is there already someone else? I didn't know what to say. I just sat there dumbfounded. She looked almost relieved, like getting it off her chest made her feel better. Meanwhile, I felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my gut. After dinner, I needed to get the hell out of the house for a bit. I grabbed a cigar from the little box I kept out back, stepped onto the patio, and lit it. The night was cool, but I was sweating like crazy. I stared at the sky, letting the smoke swirl around me as my mind ran in circles. Why am I even considering this? But some part of me, maybe the stubborn part, decided not to blow up right away. I figured if I kept things cool, I could see where this was going. Something didn't feel right, and if I exploded too soon, I might never get to the bottom of it. The next day, Melanie was like a new person. Suddenly, she was all about self-care, spending more time in front of the mirror, trying on new outfits, even hitting the gym like her life depended on it. I couldn't help but notice that her phone was always in her hand, never out of sight, not even for a second. That was when the uneasy feeling in my gut grew worse. She was doing her best to act normal, but I could see the cracks. I knew her too well to miss them. Every time she texted someone, she tilted the screen just slightly, like she didn't want me to see. But I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't going to make a scene just yet. If she thought she could play me for a fool, she had another thing coming. I mean, I could have confronted her right there, demanded to know who the hell she was texting so much. But I decided to play it smart. If there was something going on, she'd slip up eventually. They always do. It didn't take long before the cracks started to spread. Once Melanie had planted that little bombshell about an open relationship, every part of me became hyper-aware of her actions. I swear, it was like a sixth sense kicked in, something I never had to rely on before because, well, I thought I could trust my wife. But now everything she did felt like a clue, a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. She started staying late at work more often. At least that's what she told me. Funny thing, though, every time she came back home, she wasn't stressed or tired like someone who just slogged through extra hours at the office. No, she'd walk in smiling, almost glowing, like she'd just come back from a goddamn spa. And the worst part? She never smelled like her office. You know that scent people get when they've been at their desk all day? The stale coffee, printer ink, and stale air? Yeah, none of that. Instead, there'd be hints of perfume. Different perfume from the one she usually wore. I try not to let it show, but every time she said she had to stay late, I made a mental note. I started tracking when she left, when she got back, and how long she was out. I didn't say a word, just kept it all in my head, letting the anger simmer just below the surface. Then came the night I knew I had to do more than just watch. It was a Thursday. Melanie told me she was going out with co-workers for drinks after work. Something in the way she said it just didn't sit right with me. So, after she left, I pulled out my phone and called the restaurant she mentioned, just to see if she really was there. Closed for renovations, the voice on the other end said. I could feel my blood pressure spike right then and there. My fist clenched so tight my knuckles cracked. But instead of blowing up her phone and demanding answers like a madman, I told myself to hold back. If she was lying about this, I needed more than just one slip-up. I needed proof. Undeniable, rock-solid proof. A few days later, the opportunity I'd been waiting for practically fell into my lap. Melanie had rushed out of the bathroom, leaving her phone sitting on the sink. For once, the thing wasn't glued to her hand, and I wasn't about to waste a second. Heart pounding, I grabbed it and started scrolling through her messages. That's when I found him, Travis. A name I had never heard before, but seeing it made my stomach churn. Their conversation was long, full of inside jokes and casual flirting. But one message stood out like a neon sign. Melanie. I told him about the open relationship, and he agreed. Now we can finally have our night together, just like we planned. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. So, this is what she'd been up to. All those late nights and secret texts. It wasn't freedom she wanted. It was Travis. For a second, I wanted to smash her phone into 1,000 pieces. But instead, I took a deep breath, forcing the rage back down into my gut. If I exploded now, she'd just twist things around and play the victim. No, I needed to be smart about this. Without hesitating, I synced her phone to mine. It was easier than I thought, and within minutes, I had full access to her messages, her photos, everything. Now I had a front row seat to the whole damn circus. I slipped the phone back on the bathroom counter, just as she called from the living room. Vincent? Everything okay? Yeah. I called back, steadying my voice. Just washing up. When I walked back out, she was lounging on the couch, scrolling through social media like she didn't have a care in the world. But I knew. I knew what she was planning with Travis. And I wasn't just going to sit back and let it happen. For now, though, I kept my cool. There'd be time for confrontation later. But when it came, it was going to hit her like a freight train. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let Melanie run around with her little open relationship experiment without making a move of my own. If she thought she could screw around with some guy named Travis and come home like nothing happened, she was dead wrong. I'd played by the rules our entire marriage, but now it was time to break a few of my own. That's when Josie crossed my mind. Josie, the neighbor from 2 doors down, who always seemed just a little too friendly whenever we ran into each other. She was the kind of woman who made eye contact just a second too long, always throwing out compliments with a playful smile. I never thought about her seriously before. After all, I was married. But things were different now. If Melanie wanted to play games, then so could I. One night, after Melanie had gone to meet a friend, which I knew damn well meant Travis, I grabbed a bottle of wine from the kitchen and headed out. It was dark, the neighborhood quiet, and as I walked to Josie's front door, my heart was pounding like a drum in my chest. Not from nerves, no. From the sheer thrill of knowing I was finally taking control. When Josie answered the door, she was wearing a silky robe that clung to her in all the right places. Her lips curled into a smile that told me everything I needed to know. "Well, this is a surprise," she said, leaning against the doorframe, the robe parting slightly at her thigh. "Thought I'd bring over some wine," I said, holding up the bottle. "Figured we could catch up." She laughed softly, stepping aside to let me in. "I thought you'd never ask." We sat on her couch, the bottle between us, and the wine flowed as easily as the conversation. At first, it was just small talk, life in the neighborhood, her latest dating disasters. But with every sip, the tension between us thickened. I could feel her eyes lingering on me, and when her hand brushed mine, she didn't pull away. "You know," she said, tilting her head with that playful smirk, "I always wondered why you never came over before." I leaned in just a little closer, the warmth of the wine buzzing in my veins. Maybe I was waiting for the right moment. Her eyes locked with mine, and before I could second-guess myself, I closed the distance between us. The kiss was electric, full of all the frustration and anger I'd been bottling up. She responded instantly, pulling me closer, her hands tangled in my hair as if she'd been waiting for this as long as I had. Within minutes, the wine was forgotten. Clothes hit the floor in a blur as we stumbled into her bedroom, and the tension that had been building finally erupted. It wasn't slow or gentle. It was raw, desperate, and exactly what I needed. In the middle of it all, I had a moment of clarity. As I lay there, tangled in Josie's sheets, her skin warm against mine, the thought hit me like a shot of cold water. I've always followed the rules. But since she broke them first, why shouldn't I take what I want for once? For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like the guy getting walked all over. I felt in control, and damn, it felt good. Afterward, we lay there, catching our breath in the dark, the only sound the soft hum of the ceiling fan overhead. Josie turned toward me, her fingers trailing lazily over my chest. "Are you going to tell her?" she whispered. I shook my head. Not yet. There was no reason to rush. Melanie had no idea what I'd done tonight, and that gave me the upper hand. If she wanted to keep playing her little games with Travis, I'd let her. But now I had my own game, and I was just getting started. I knew the exact moment Melanie set up her little rendezvous with Travis. It was right there in the texts I'd been monitoring on my phone like clockwork. Every new message she sent made my stomach churn with rage. Friday night, dinner at that fancy bistro downtown. She even mentioned the dress she'd wear, his favorite. The sick satisfaction I felt reading those messages was almost unsettling. She thought she was clever sneaking around behind my back. But she had no idea I was 3 steps ahead, watching everything unfold. And this time, I wasn't just going to sit back and let it happen. No, I had a plan. Friday night came faster than I expected. Melanie spent the entire afternoon getting ready, acting like she was heading out to some corporate gala. I watched her as she fussed over her makeup, smoothing her hair in the mirror, and slipping into that dress. Tight, black, and low-cut. She sprayed herself with perfume, the same scent she hadn't worn in months, and then stood in front of the mirror, adjusting herself until everything looked perfect. She was glowing with excitement, and it made me sick to my stomach. There she was, right in front of me, a woman who'd once promised me forever, now getting dolled up for some other man. I kept my face neutral, but inside, my blood boiled. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. She hummed as she walked through the kitchen, heels clicking against the floor, checking her phone every few minutes, probably exchanging those stupid texts with Travis. "Want a coffee before you head out?" I asked from the kitchen, trying to sound casual. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled. One of those fake smiles she'd perfected over the years. "Sure, just a small one." "Perfect." While the coffee brewed, I pulled the small packet from my pocket. The laxative was a sneaky little trick, tasteless and odorless. I stirred it into her coffee and handed her the cup with a straight face. She took it without a second thought, sipping slowly as she sat at the kitchen island, still glowing with excitement. I leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her as she finished the coffee. Every sip felt like a victory. When she was finally ready to leave, she gave me a half-hearted kiss on the cheek. "I'll see you later tonight." "Have fun," I said, my voice even. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. I knew it wouldn't take long for the magic to happen. Exactly 45 minutes later, the front door flew open, and there she was, red-faced, breathless, and furious. She kicked off her heels, tossed her purse onto the floor, and stormed into the living room, muttering curses under her breath. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "It was a disaster," she groaned. "I don't know what came over me. One minute I'm fine, the next, I'm running to the bathroom every 5 minutes. It was humiliating." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm sorry, Mel. That sounds awful." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with frustration and shame. "I'm sorry, Vincent. I really am. I just want us to go back to how things were. Can we do that?" For a moment, I stood there, pretending to consider her words. Then I walked over, sat beside her, and pulled her into a warm embrace. She melted into me, her arms wrapping around my waist. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking her hair gently. "We'll figure it out." But inside, I was gloating. I knew things would never go back to how they were. That bridge had burned the moment she invited Travis into our lives. As she clung to me, apologizing again and again, I stared over her shoulder at the clock on the wall, my mind already moving ahead. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. It didn't take long for everything to start falling apart. After the night Melanie's date with Travis went sideways, she became a walking storm cloud, swinging between guilty apologies and cold detachment. I let her hang herself with her own guilt, just sat back and watched the mess unfold. The house felt heavy, suffocating, like there was a layer of resentment in the air we both refused to acknowledge directly. We started fighting about everything. Stuff that never mattered before became explosive. Unwashed dishes in the sink, who was supposed to take the trash out, the way I folded the laundry. Every conversation turned into a passive-aggressive argument, until even planning a simple weekend outing felt like a battleground. "I thought we were going to your parents for dinner," she'd say, already annoyed. "Yeah, well, plans change," I'd snap back. I wasn't even trying to hide my resentment anymore. I'd see her scrolling on her phone, her thumb moving like she was trying to solve the world's most important problem, and it took everything in me not to grab it out of her hands. Every time I saw her text, I knew who it was, Travis. And every time, it reminded me how far gone we were. The final nail in the coffin came one night when curiosity got the better of me. I was sitting on the couch while she was in the shower. Her phone buzzed, and without thinking, I reached for it. Old habits die hard, I guess. I unlocked it with ease, same passcode as always. I knew I shouldn't have been surprised by what I found, but the gut punch was still there. Another message from Travis. "Can't wait to see you again, Mel." This time, no interruptions. Winky face. The anger bubbled up fast. Before I could put the phone down, the shower shut off, and Melanie walked out of the bathroom. She caught me red-handed, her eyes narrowing, mouth pulling into a tight, furious line. "What the hell are you doing with my phone?" she snapped, marching over and yanking it out of my hand. "I'm checking to see how deep the knife in my back is," I shot back, my voice dripping with venom. That's when the floodgates opened. "You don't love me anymore, do you?" she yelled, throwing her hands up. "You're not even trying to save us." I stood there, arms crossed, cold and unmoving. "Why should I? You were the one who broke us." Her face twisted with frustration, and for a second, I saw real hurt flash across her eyes. But I didn't care. That version of me, the guy who cared about her feelings, was long gone. The argument spiraled from there, both of us hurling accusations and bitter words. There was no coming back from this, and deep down, I think we both knew it. Every harsh thing I'd held back over the past few months came pouring out, and she threw just as much back at me. "You're not the man I married," she shouted. "And you sure as hell aren't the woman I married." I fired back. It was brutal. Every word felt like a match being struck, setting fire to whatever was left between us. By the end of it, she was in tears, slamming doors as she stormed through the house, while I sat on the couch, numb and exhausted. That night, lying awake in bed, I realized something. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care if she loved me or if she hated me. I didn't care if we fixed things or if the whole marriage burned to the ground. The love I once had for her was gone, snuffed out like a candle. I knew I had to end things, but timing was everything. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. No, I'd end it when I was ready, when it hurt her the most. It was early, one of those mornings when the house felt unnervingly quiet. I was half asleep, tangled in the sheets, hoping for a few more minutes of peace before facing the mess that was my life. But that peace didn't last. A knock rattled the front door. Not the casual tap of a delivery driver, but the kind of knock that told you someone was standing on the other side, carrying a load of trouble. Dragging myself out of bed, I shuffled to the door. When I opened it, there stood Josie. She was pale, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. For a moment, she just stared at me like she was trying to figure out how to say what she needed to say. "Josie," I asked, my voice thick with sleep. She bit her lip, exhaling sharply. "Vincent, I'm pregnant. It's yours." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My brain stuttered, struggling to process what she'd just said. Pregnant? I hadn't even thought about the possibility, not once. Before I could say anything, I heard the creak of floorboards behind me. I turned just in time to see Melanie standing there, barefoot and in one of my old t-shirts, her expression shifting from confusion to pure, unfiltered rage. Her voice sliced through the air like a knife. "You slept with her? How could you do this to me?" Josie took a step back, glancing nervously between us, but I stood my ground. I was done playing nice. "How could I do this?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You were the one who started all this with your open relationship nonsense. That set her off. You could have said no," she screamed, her face twisted in fury. But no, you had to go screw the first slut you could find. And you didn't waste any time jumping into bed with Travis, did you? I shot back, stepping closer. Don't stand there pretending you're the victim, Melanie. This is exactly what you wanted. Congratulations, you got it. The argument erupted like a volcano. Months of anger, betrayal, and resentment pouring out of both of us. We yelled, cursed, and dragged out every dirty secret we'd been holding on to, throwing them like grenades at each other. You never cared about us? Not really, she shouted, her face flushed with rage. And you cared so much that you couldn't keep your legs closed. I fired back. We went at it for hours, both of us too stubborn to back down, each insult cutting deeper than the last. The house felt like it was going to explode from the weight of our words, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. This was the end game. We were just tearing down whatever pieces were left. Finally, I snapped. This marriage was already over, I said, my voice low but filled with finality. This just sped things up. For a moment, there was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Melanie stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes brimming with angry tears, but she had nothing left to say. The next day, I filed for divorce. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest, a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. A few months later, Josie and I were getting ready to welcome our baby into the world. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but it felt right, like I was finally getting a fresh start. And you know what? I didn't feel a single ounce of regret. Not for ending the marriage. Not for sleeping with Josie. Not for any of it. Melanie's experiment with open relationships had been the beginning of the end. And in a strange way, I was grateful it happened. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. Filing for divorce felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and jumping without knowing where I'd land. For weeks afterward, I was caught between relief and fear, unsure if I'd made the right choice or if I was headed for a crash. There were nights when the silence in the house was deafening. No more late-night arguments, no passive-aggressive remarks about the smallest things, just empty rooms and the faint hum of the fridge. Some days it felt good. Other days, the loneliness crept in, making me question if I was really built to do this on my own. Josie was my anchor through it all. She moved in about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. It just made sense. Her pregnancy was progressing, and we wanted to prepare for the baby together. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Merging two lives isn't easy, especially when you're still unpacking the emotional baggage from your previous one. Some nights, after work, I'd come home exhausted, and we'd snap at each other over nothing. A sock left on the floor, a grocery item forgotten. But somehow, we always managed to talk things through. This time, I wasn't going to let petty fights build up like I had with Melanie. Money was a struggle at first. Starting over from scratch after a divorce is no joke. I had to take on extra consulting gigs, working late into the night just to make sure we were comfortable. Josie had left her job at a marketing firm because the stress wasn't good for the pregnancy. And with me being the only one bringing in money, there were moments when I felt the pressure crushing down on me. But every time I started to spiral, she was there, reminding me why we were doing this, keeping me grounded. The day Emily was born was a blur of panic, exhaustion, and overwhelming joy. I remember holding Josie's hand in the hospital room as she screamed through contractions, feeling utterly useless, but trying to keep it together for her sake. When the nurse finally handed me that tiny, wriggling baby, something inside me shifted. I stared down at Emily, her little face scrunched up and screaming, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was a father. Those first few months with Emily were brutal in the best way. Sleepless nights, diaper blowouts, endless crying. It was chaos. There were moments when I thought I'd lose my mind, running on 3 hours of sleep and a pot of stale coffee. But then there were the moments that made it all worth it. The first time Emily smiled at me, those quiet early mornings when I rocked her back to sleep and felt like the luckiest man in the world. Every milestone, her first laugh, her first roll, her first word, felt like a small victory, proof that we were doing something right. Raising a baby isn't easy, but having Josie by my side made all the difference. We learned to lean on each other in ways I hadn't thought possible. Sure, we had our share of arguments. Who doesn't when they're sleep-deprived and overwhelmed? But unlike with Melanie, every argument with Josie ended with us finding a solution, not throwing blame. We were a team, and that made all the difference. A year after Emily was born, I knew it was time to make things official. I didn't plan some elaborate proposal. That's never been my style. One night, after Emily had finally gone to sleep, I pulled out a ring I'd been carrying around for weeks and asked Josie to marry me. She didn't even hesitate. She just smiled, kissed me, and said yes. Our wedding was small, just close friends and family, no big spectacle. I'd had the flashy wedding with Melanie, and look how that turned out. This time it was simple and real. Standing there with Josie, holding her hands as we exchanged vows, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. I wasn't worried about the future or haunted by the past. I was just happy. Not everyone took the news well. Some of our old friends from the neighborhood gave us the cold shoulder, whispering behind our backs like we were characters in some soap opera. I overheard one couple at the grocery store muttering about how I'd moved on too quickly. But honestly, I didn't care. People love to gossip, and most of them have no idea what it's like to rebuild your life after betrayal. Melanie, of course, had her own reaction. Word got back to her about the wedding, probably from one of those same gossiping neighbors, and she was furious. She sent me a string of texts, accusing me of ruining her life, calling Josie all sorts of vile names, and demanding to know how I could move on so easily. I didn't respond. There was no point. Engaging with her would just drag me back into the toxicity I'd fought so hard to escape. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Emily became the center of our little world, and watching her grow was the greatest joy I'd ever known. Every time she took a step or said a new word, I felt like I was winning at life. And Josie was my rock. She made everything feel manageable, even on the hardest days. There were still challenges, of course. Balancing work, parenthood, and a relationship is a juggling act, and there were times when I dropped the ball. But the difference now was that I had someone who was willing to pick it up with me, not throw it back in my face. We built a life together, a real one, messy and imperfect but filled with love. Looking back, I've realized that the hardest part wasn't the divorce or even the betrayal. It was learning to let go. Letting go of the anger, the resentment, the what-ifs. It's easy to hold on to bitterness, to let it fester and consume you. But eventually, you have to make a choice. Do you let the past define you, or do you move forward? I chose to move forward. Sometimes people ask if I regret how things turned out, if I wish I had fought harder for my marriage with Melanie, or if I ever missed the life we had. And the answer is simple. No, I don't regret a thing. Melanie's experiment with open relationships may have been the beginning of the end, but it also gave me a chance to build something better, something real. Now, when I look at Josie and Emily, I know I made the right choice. Life didn't go the way I'd planned, but it took me exactly where I needed to be. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not just surviving, I'm living. It was bound to happen sooner or later. You can't share years of your life with someone and not eventually bump into them again, even if you think you've put that part of your life behind you. I hadn't seen Melanie since the divorce was finalized, which was fine by me. I thought we could go on like that, me living my life with Josie and Emily, her doing whatever it is people like Melanie do after blowing up their marriages. But the universe had other plans. It happened on a random Saturday afternoon. I was running errands, just trying to grab some groceries and get home in time for Emily's nap. I was halfway down the produce aisle, distracted by a toddler who was determined to knock apples off a display, when I heard a voice behind me. Well, if it isn't Vincent. I froze for a second. That voice was burned into my brain, sharp, a little too sweet, like she was always holding back a jab. I turned around, and there she was, Melanie. She looked different. Not in a bad way, but different. Her hair was shorter, and she wore a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a brief moment, I wondered if she'd say something civil, maybe even make some attempt at small talk. But no, that wasn't Melanie's style. Didn't think I'd run into you here, she said, her arms crossed like she was daring me to say the wrong thing. Yeah, well, life's full of surprises, I muttered, already wishing I could evaporate into thin air. She gave me a once-over, her eyes lingering a little too long, as if she was trying to gauge just how happy I looked without her. So, I heard about you and Josie. Must be nice to shack up with a neighbor. There it was. The first jab. I knew better than to take the bait, but old habits die hard. Yeah, it is nice, actually, I replied, keeping my tone light. We got a good thing going. Emily keeps us busy, that's for sure. Her smile faltered for a split second at the mention of Emily, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Good. Part of me wanted to keep twisting the knife, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to sink to her level. She crossed her arms tighter, clearly irritated by my lack of interest in whatever game she thought we were playing. You moved on quick, she said, her voice dripping with bitterness. Quicker than you did with Travis? I shot back before I could stop myself. Her eyes flared with anger. That was different. You. No, it wasn't. I cut her off, keeping my voice low and calm. You wanted your freedom, remember? You wanted to explore. Well, I explored too. You don't get to be mad about that. The silence between us was heavy, like the air before a storm. I could see the frustration building behind her eyes, but she had nowhere to direct it. You know, Vincent, she said finally, her voice quieter now but no less venomous. You think you've got it all figured out. But someday, you'll see it's not as perfect as you think. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. Maybe, but even if that day comes, at least I'll know I tried. I didn't quit when things got hard, and I didn't betray the people I love. Her jaw tightened, and I knew that was the final blow. She had nothing left to say, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of dragging this conversation out any longer. Well, I said, turning back to my cart, you have a good day, Melanie. She stood there for a moment, watching me, probably waiting for some parting shot that never came. Eventually, she huffed and walked away, her heels clicking angrily against the tile floor. As I watched her disappear down the aisle, I felt nothing, no anger, no regret, no lingering sadness. Just relief. For the first time in a long time, I knew that whatever we'd had was well and truly over. And it felt damn good. I went back to my shopping, grabbed the last of what I needed, and headed home. When I walked through the door, Josie was in the living room with Emily, laughing as our daughter tried to wobble her way across the carpet. Hey, Josie called out with a smile. You're back. Yeah, I said, leaning down to kiss her. And it's good to be home.